This is going to be a difficult video to make. What? No, it's not an apology video. As you all probably know, Amphibia has finished its third and final season, and after being depressed and laying on the couch for about a week, I spent 6 hours working on this piece. So before we actually get started, I do want to say that this video will contain spoilers for the show, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you watch it. I'll put up a warning sign when I'm about to talk about the spoilers, just in case if you're ignoring my warning here and going ahead. Anyways, without further ado, let's get started. I wanted to draw the characters having some kind of party because they never really got one. At least a victory party, I should say, just to clarify. I used the piece Karina did at the end of Drawtective Season 1 for inspiration for this piece, and for those of you who haven't seen it, it's the cast having a party at Hucky He's, and I tried to mimic that energy. I also figured it would work because there's an arcade in Utopia, and we never got to see it, or at least the inside of it. Outside we saw a kid almost get devoured by Anne for cutting in line. A perfectly reasonable response. Anyways, I have no reference for the interior, and I just did what I wanted. And I have no idea what any of the games are, except for really the ball rolling thing and the crane game. When I posted the final image on Reddit, someone asked if they were at Hucky He's, and I'm so glad that someone got the Drawtective reference. Also, there's a lot of people that thought that the tickets next to Anne looked like a tail. And to be honest, I noticed that when I was doing, like, the shading of it is kind of when I realized it, but I'm like, I'm lazy, I don't want to fix it. Hopefully no one will notice. Didn't work out. People noticed. Amphibia has taught me a lot of things. I don't mean life lessons, it helped me improve my art. My art style has changed quite a bit, and I can thank Amphibia for that. The way I draw characters has become more cartoony as I drew fan art, as opposed to the more anime style I had. Instead of shying away from that, I chose to lean into it, and I feel like I'm creating better looking and more unique characters because of that. Not only that, I started to pick apart how backgrounds were done and did some additional research, and little by little, my backgrounds have been improving. Though they still have a long way to go. Like, what does someone's bedroom look like, and make it look realistically lived in instead of plain, boring, lacking personality, and empty? There has also been plenty of times I've looked at Amphibia backgrounds to use as reference when I need to see some plants. Plants, unfortunately, are hard, especially when you want a good wild or populated background, like if you were putting things in a jungle or swamp. Looking at the trees and mushrooms and other plants really helped me bring life to the backgrounds. I even used cornfields as reference because I needed to draw a lot of cornfields as a background for multiple pages in my comic series Souls of the Lost, and looking at that reference was able to help me create a better looking and more simplified cornfield, I think. The main thing that I learned that I think would be adding in the most use for me was using different kinds of textures, just how I can easily achieve that. Using color burn layers and overlay layers in it will help make things pop or just look more interesting. Different art techniques aren't the only thing I was able to learn from the show. Every episode adds something in a small way, whether it be giving a character a skill that will come in handy for more episodes down the line than when it first appears, or foreshadowing future events, or the developing of characters, including side characters. This taught me as a storyteller that I really need to pay attention to what each character is doing in each chapter and how that will impact the rest of the story, the good and the bad. You don't really want a character to be doing something that will ultimately be pointless and have no impact or no lasting effects or no character development of the story. That would just be filler at that point. And I feel as if this shouldn't have been as obvious, but I have a tendency to focus on what my end goal is and not think too much about the middle. Unfortunately, the middle of the story is where most of the story takes place. So if you neglect that part, by the end, people may not care about the characters or the plot points you set up along the way, assuming they stick with the story that long and don't just give up on it. This sort of thing doesn't need to be done at the same pace of Amphibia. There are plenty of amazing shows that are much faster paced and are able to accomplish the same amazing endings. Fortunately for me, Amphibia's slower paced style of storytelling made me see these things and learn from them. At this point is where I'll be bringing up things that will be considered spoilers if you haven't seen the show till its conclusion. So this is your warning. If you haven't seen the show and don't want it spoiled, I recommend you stop watching here. If you want to mute me and continue watching the Speedpaint, go right ahead. The drawing itself doesn't have spoilers in it. This show means a lot to me. It's fun and light, except for when necessary. The season finales give you an emotional payoff that you don't really get in other places in the show. I will say, and discovering Hot Pop hid the music box in Season 2, and you reuniting with your parents in Season 3 are great emotional moments that had a lot of setup, and the payoff was great. So it's not just the season finales, but that's just what I want to talk about right now. Throughout the first season, we see Anne has a toxic relationship with her friends, or at least Sasha. Her views on what friendship is in the second episode is definitely the view of someone in an abusive friendship. Whether it be helping them do something, giving her your shoes, or doing something you don't really want to do, because if you don't, they may not want to be friends with you anymore. And as we see, Anne was pressured into stealing the music box from a store, which ultimately transported her and her friends to Amphibia. Ultimately, it was Marcy's idea, but we'll get into that a little bit later. We also have an episode showing Sasha manipulating a bunch of toads to fight giant herrings, so she could leave and search for her friends. She decides to wind up staying at the tower to have the help of an entire army looking for her friends, but it reinforces the idea of the toxic relationship Anne and Sasha wind up having because of the manipulation she pulls off. There is some more build-up to the events of Toad Tower at the end of Season 1 in Reunion, where Anne and Sasha reunite. At first, Anne falls right back into place with Sasha, but upon discovering she wants to kill Hot Pop for political reasons, Anne freaks out and tries to help the frog escape Toad Tower, ultimately failing and almost falling back in line with Sasha until Sprig gives her the courage to stand up to her, which in turn leads to a duel, Anne winning, and Toad Tower exploding. Oh, right, and Sasha almost dying. Real packed episode there. In Season 2, we are introduced to Marcy, who is a lovable dork who cannot pay attention to her surroundings to save her life. Sasha refuses to learn her lesson about manipulation and decides she wants to rule Amphibia with grime, and this leads to the events of True Colors, where Sasha successfully manipulates Anne and Marcy into thinking that she's changed to ultimately betray them and temporarily seize the throne. And Marcy and the Planters take it back, and King Andreas reveals his plan to use the music box to invade other worlds, and that Marcy orchestrated the girls being transported to Amphibia. It was ultimately Marcy who was the one pressuring Anne into stealing it in the first place, not Sasha like we're led to believe. Well, also Sasha, but it wasn't Sasha's idea. There's a ton of build-up and foreshadowing to these events, and that's what makes this episode so exciting and fun to watch. Like, solely watching True Colors on its own would have nowhere near as much impact if you hadn't watched the first two seasons. That build-up really just makes it good. Makes it good. Great words, Andy. Season 3 had a lot of the same slow build-up, and I heard that people were complaining about the slow pace on Reddit, but to be honest, that's kind of how this show chose to work. Slow building ups to develop side characters who would be important later. For example, Dr. X was one of those people. In All In and The Hardest Things, we get to see a lot of the remaining pieces come together. Sasha's redemption, the defeat of Darcy and the Core, King Andreas being defeated and kind of redeemed, and beyond that we get to see the characters grow up and see what they do with their lives, or at least what they've done with them in the next 10 years. It was very heartwarming to see all of the main cast grow up, especially after the Calamity Trio left Amphibia. They returned to Earth after saying goodbyes to never see each other again. That was the hardest part of the end of Season 3 for me. Watching all of these characters we got to know and love say goodbye each other for the last time. It was hard seeing the Planters and Anne, who viewed each other as family, part ways. I honestly thought Disney was going to cop out on this big commitment they made to a permanent goodbye, and I'm very glad to see that they actually went through with it. The last episode, The Hardest Things, isn't just about saving the world. Even though that's challenging, it's not one of the hardest things. It's about accepting that all journeys come to an end, and sometimes we say our final goodbye to the people we care about. And despite us eventually moving forward with our own lives, we will always treasure them for the impact that they had on our lives. I know Marcy's Journal is something that's coming out, and perhaps there'll be other stories to be told if Disney allows it, but unfortunately, the TV series Amphibia is over, and it's time to say goodbye. Thank you, Matt Braley and the rest of the crew. You have made a show that I will forever cherish.
Also, Marcy has an online comic just like me. Oh my god, we're twins. Bye.